Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our new YouTube channel called Sunny Notting Hill. My name is Paul Shepherd, I'm your presenter, and our director is a guy called Danny. He's working with me today here. We're broadcasting to you from Notting Hill in West London, near the centre of London. And what I'm going to do today is outline basically what the themes are of our programs that we're going to present to you over the weeks and the months. We're going to discuss Gothic literature and two of its most successful subgenres, science fiction and dystopian literature. And I'm going to take you back to the origins of Gothic literature, way back into the 18th century, and run through the basic history from when the Gothic genre began. It actually began in England in a place called Twickenham, not very far from where I'm talking to you from now. It's just along from the River Thames. The River Thames runs through London, in case you don't know London. And the guy who wrote the first ever Gothic novel was a very eccentric Englishman called Horace Walpole. And he lived in a villa in Twickenham, fairly close to where we're talking to you from. And in 1764, he wrote a novel called The Castle of Otranto. Now, for those of you who don't know of Otranto, you don't know where it is, it's actually on the southeast coast of Italy, way down in the south. And he wrote this book called The Castle of Otranto, which takes place in the Middle Ages at the time of the Crusades. And as I say, this was written in 1764 and was published in 1764 by Walpole. He had his own printing press. He didn't sign his own name on the book. He was frightened he'd be ridiculed for the content. But he went ahead and published it under a nom de plume. And to his big surprise, it was a big success. So he reprinted the book the following year in 1765 with a slightly modified title. And this time he called it The Castle of Otranto, comma, a Gothic story. So that's where we get our first ever Gothic novel from this guy, Horace Walpole, in this place called Twickenham, not very far from here. So The Castle of Otranto, a Gothic story. And as I say, this was in the 1760s, 260 years ago, actually, it was first published. The Gothic genre, throughout the remainder of the 18th century, became fairly popular in England. And it also spread to France and Germany to a certain extent, and a little bit later on to the United States of America. But basically it originated in England, and now it's become extremely popular after 260 years. I need to point out that in no way was late 1760s England anything like Gothic. The Goths were a Germanic nation who crossed into the Roman Empire hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and in fact they helped precipitate the downfall of the Western Roman Empire. The language is dead now, the Gothic language is dead. And the term Gothic throughout the Middle Ages was used as an artistic term. It survived through the Middle Ages, after the Renaissance, and it continued then as an art form in the visual arts, in poetry and in music. So there we have the first Gothic novel, the first ever Gothic tale or Gothic story written by Horace Walpole. As I say, the genre became very popular through the remainder of the 18th century. Towards the 18th century and the early 19th century, we then pass into what we call the Romantic period. And this was the age of Mary Shelley and Lord Byron, and it was the age of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. 260 years later, the genre has broadened out to so many different types of things. It's not just books and novels now. It's now in cinema as well, very popular in cinema, on television, in music, in the theatre. It's on computer games. And of course, it's the basis for parties in the autumn to celebrate Halloween. Everybody knows the costumes for Halloween. They've originated from the Gothic genre. We'll talk a lot about pure Gothic as we go along. And as I say, we're going to do a lot on science fiction and dystopian as well. The genre produced so many gifted writers who are now household names. And with the advent of movies in the 20th century, it brought on very successful careers for certain actors. Some actors based their whole careers in Gothic or horror movies, and they became very, very famous and much loved by audiences. The content of these movies and these novels at the time, there was a lot of anxiety in novels, psychological extremes, a lot of paranoia. But these days, things have changed a lot. A lot of Gothic literature and a lot of Gothic movies now, you could put them under the headline of sci-fi or dystopian. And there's a lot of things are now written on the denigration of the planet due to climate change. And there's so much of this now in the cinema. It's very, very popular with audiences, and it's very big businesses for literature and movies, and extremely, extremely popular. Let's take a look at some of the kind of characters we may see in Gothic, sci-fi or dystopian. So first of all, we have, if we go back to the very old material, we have things like spirits and ghosts. Later on in the 19th century, early 20th century, we had vampires, crazed scientists. Later on, we had time travel, time machines. We had things like cyberpunk in the 20th century. Cyborgs suddenly came along. They came from places in the future. Alien invasions, very popular. Alternate realities. And then we have the kind of things that happen to you at night when you go to sleep. You maybe have a nightmare or a dream. But we all have these kind of surreal visions that we see at night time while we're asleep. There is a lot of this in the Gothic genre. There's primeval fear, very strong, psychological extremes, terror, identity crises where people just do not understand where they are in life. There's themes on the ruined planet brought about by climate change or perhaps global warfare. And these days, one of the great concerns, one of the great debates across the planet is the advent of artificial intelligence and how this will affect human future throughout the 21st century. So a lot of anxiety these days and a lot of paranoia about a ruined planet, and also the advent of artificial intelligence. So some of the places that we may see in these books, in these movies, in the old days we had dusty old castles with creaky floors, creaky doors opening, maybe old ancestors haunting the house. And there are quite often scenes of people living in old houses or in castles, halfway up remote mountains, surrounded by forests, lit by the moonlight. We have climate collapse now and devastating war. There are so many wars around our planet at the moment. And one of the great concerns is, are we on the brink of World War III? Well, we sincerely hope that we're not. So some very, very interesting themes, literature and in books and in our favourite movies as well. So what we'd like to do also is introduce you to some of the most famous names that have contributed to the genre. Apart from Horace Walpole, who created the first novel, we had the Romantics, as I mentioned, Mary Shelley, her husband Percy Bysshe Shelley, Lord Byron. And as the 19th century progressed, we had some very, very famous household names came along. In France, we had Jules Verne, sometimes known as the father of science fiction. Arthur Conan Doyle from Britain, and his great creation, Sherlock Holmes, the great detective. In America, we had Edgar Allan Poe, sometimes known as the master of suspense. And also Nathaniel Hawthorne from America. Well, back in England, we had in Yorkshire in North England, the very famous Bronte sisters. And we had the great H.G. Wells, wrote some of the greatest science fiction stories of the 19th and the 20th century. Along with Wells, there was Robert Louis Stevenson, a Scotsman who came to live in England in a place called Bournemouth. And also another very eccentric Englishman called William Beckford, a very crazy guy who wrote very, very strange stories indeed. And from the island of Ireland, two very famous writers of French descent, Sheridan Le Fanu and Charles Mathurin. Now, these days, so many different stories, some of these great stories by these great authors have been transferred to the silver screen. And in the early 20th century, of course, with the spreading of cinemas, many, many famous people came along who became household names in these very scary movies. People like Lon Chaney as the Phantom of the Opera. Bela Lugosi created the role of Dracula. And Lon Chaney, who was in the Phantom of the Opera, his son, Lon Chaney Jr., created the role of Wolfman. So we have also Boris Karloff. He appeared in the very famous movie of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. He played the monster, and he's also very famous for his role as playing the mummy. So towards as we progress towards the end of the 20th century, Gothic, science fiction and dystopian are so easily available these days, not just in cinema, but in home entertainment, on computers, and it's very easy to find this sort of material anywhere. So ladies and gentlemen, my dear followers, I hope you've enjoyed our brief introduction, and I'd like to thank you for coming along and listening to me today, and I hope you'll come back and join us again soon to tune in, watch, listen come back for more, and you can be certain we'll be waiting for you with new material, and also waiting for your comments. We'd like to hear what you think of our production, and that will help us to work out our programs for the future. But one thing is for sure, we're going to make you think. Perhaps we'll make you a little bit scared, and it's going to be full of suspense, full of surprises. So once again, I thank you so much for listening to me, my dear followers. Once again, my name is Paul Shepherd, and I'd like to thank you also on behalf of Danny, our technical director. Thanks so much for coming along. We look forward to seeing you again soon. So in the meantime, enjoy your life, look out for Gothic material, and bye-bye for now, and take good care.